Okay guys, I just want to go over this worksheet real quick. I'm going to kind of go through the top part pretty quick and then focus a little bit more on number 5. But number 1, what elements on the periodic table are most likely to form covalent compounds? Those are going to be two non-metals. So if it's a metal and a non-metal, it will not. That will be an ionic bond. Or if it comes off that special sheet of those polyatomic ions, that will also be an ionic bond. So hence the name polyatomic ions. Number 2, how does the bond that forms between sodium and chlorine differ from the bond that forms between nitrogen and chlorine? Well, sodium and chlorine, you have a metal and a non-metal, so I'm just going to write M and NM, which means they are going to give/take electrons. So that's how you get your charges. Your metal is going to give electrons and become positive, and that non-metal is going to take those negative electrons, and it makes them have a negative charge. And that's how they bond. They bond by these opposite charges. Now, nitrogen and chlorine are two non-metals, which means that they are going to share electrons. So that is the difference between how bonds are formed there. All right, so now number 3, I'm just going to read through these. And what we have on A, these are all covalent. It tells you that at the top, they're all covalent compounds. So I'm going to use prefixes. So for A, I'm going to say phosphorus, and it's bromide, but there are 3 of them. So I'm going to say phosphorus tribromide. For B, I'm going to say carbon, and it's bromide, but there are 4, so it's carbon tetrabromide. For C, it is silicon, and I see that there's a 2 here, so the prefix is going to be di, so it is silicon dioxide. D is hydrogen fluoride, or you can say hydrogen monofluoride. However you want to say it, that's fine. If you take chemistry 2, we'll learn that that's actually an acid, and we'll learn a different way to name it anyway, so I will probably just write hydrogen fluoride. On E, we have nitrogen triiodide, since there are 3 iodines. For F, it is carbon disulfide. G, this is the first time we've seen subscripts on both, so I'm going to say diphosphorus. Now, I had several kids wanting to say diphosphide, but it's still diphosphorus because it is the first element. And then pentoxide or pentaoxide, you put that A on there, you can, but diphosphorus pentoxide. H is silicon tetrafluoride. I is iodine tribromide. And J is carbon dioxide. All right, now on A, we're doing the opposite. We're doing the formulas, which were up here. So carbon is just a single C. So it would look like this, C, and then tetrachloride. I have chlorine, but I have 4 of them. So CCl4, of course that 4 should be a subscript. So CCl4. Carbon monoxide is just CO. A capital C and a capital O. If you put capital C lowercase o, that looks like cobalt. So capital C, capital O. Phosphorus trichloride is PCl3. Dinitrogen tetraoxide is N2O4. Dinitrogen oxide is N2O. Sulfur hexafluoride is SF6. All right, so then let's look at number 5. These are the ones that can be a little bit more complicated because they're all mixed up. So the first thing I look at is aluminum and chlorine. Is that a metal and a non-metal, or is it 2 non-metals? Well, aluminum is in column 13, and it is a metal, and chlorine is a non-metal. So that is going to be an ionic bond. So I'm just going to write an I there. When you have an ionic bond, you're going to name it like it looks. So aluminum chloride, that's what we've been doing. The question we always have to ask ourselves with ionic is, do we know the charges? And for aluminum, I know it's a +3 and chlorine's a negative. I know that from my periodic table. So I just leave it like it looks, aluminum chloride. SO3. Sulfur and oxygen are 2 nonmetals. They're both found on that right side of the stair step on the periodic table. So it is covalent bond. So I'm going to use prefixes. And it is sulfur triiodide. oxide. N2O, also both found on the right side of the periodic table. So it has two nonmetals, it's covalent. And the name is going to be dinitrogen. And you can say monoxide or you could just say oxide. SnNO3. So as soon as I see this NO3, that's one of those polyatomic ions off of that sheet. Polyatomic ions. It is an ion, so it is going to be an ionic bond. So I'm going to name this thing. Sn is 10, NO3 is nitrate. Then I have to ask myself, do I know the charge? And unfortunately, I do not know the charge of 10. Sn is in column 14. We do not have a charge above that column. So I have to figure it out. So NO3 is a -1 charge. If you look at your special sheet, it'll tell you it's a -1. But you have two of them. So really I have a total charge of a -2. So this 10 has to be a +2. So that, remember, that Roman numeral is telling us a charge. It is not telling us how many 10s there are. It's telling us the charge of a 10. All right, E. We have the ClO2. That's one of those polyatomic ions on that sheet, so it's ionic. I'm going to name it. Copper. And ClO2 is chlorate, I believe, but let me make sure before, no, chlorite. It is chlorite. All right. Now since it's ionic, I have to ask myself, do I know the charges? I do not. I will always know the negative though, so I'm going to look at that sheet, and chlorite is a -1, but there are two of them. So that's going to make that copper with a Roman numeral 2, copper 2 chlorite. N2, nitrogen is a nonmetal, so basically you have two nonmetals. It's going to be a covalent bond. Now I know it would be like, ooh, it's got a 2, so dinitrogen, but we learned in the notes that if something is bonded with itself, we just name it like it looks on the periodic table. It's just nitrogen. All right, now we have on GMgBr2, I see this polyatomic ion, so right away I'm like, that is an ionic bond. I'm going to name it. That is always my first step. It is magnesium, and BRO is bromate. Let me make sure that I'm getting the, no, BRO, just BRO is hypobromite. And then I always ask myself, do I know the charge? And I do. Magnesium is a +2, and I can find hypobromite on that paper. It's a -1. So I don't need a Roman numeral. H, silicon and fluorine are both on the right-hand side. So it is a covalent bond. They're both nonmetals. So I'm going to use prefixes, and it is silicon tetrafluoride. Once again, I see this polyatomic ion, so it is going to be ionic. So I'm going to name it like it looks. Ni is nickel, and SO4 is sulfate. Then I always ask myself, do I know the charge? And unfortunately, I do not know the charge of nickel. SO4 is a -2 though, so that means my nickel is going to have to be a +2. So I'm going to do a Roman numeral 2 right there. And then lastly, I have Fe2S3. So I'm going to look at my periodic table. Iron is a metal and sulfur is a nonmetal. So that makes that an ionic bond. So I'm just going to name it like it looks. Iron sulfide. Now I get a lot of people wanting to do sulfate because they're used to seeing that now from that sheet. But remember, sulfur by itself is just sulfide. My next question for ionic, do I know charges? I do not. Iron, I do not know the charge. I know sulfur's is a -2, so that makes this whole thing -6. Fe has 2, so I have to have a +3. It's going to have to be iron 3 sulfide. Okay. If you have any questions at all, let me know. We're going to go over this one in class. You guys are going to get one that is just covalent, that the kids will work on in class. But then after that, we're going to get some worksheets with mixed in there, just to make sure that you guys are okay when we mix these up. Let me know if there's anything you need. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.